Amsterdam Art at Stedelijk Museum Amsterdam. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to the few guests we have here at the auditorium here at the Stedelijk, and welcome to all of you behind your screen. It's great to be back again. It's great to be back on track again with Amsterdam Art Week and with the Stedelijk Museum. We all come slowly out of the pandemic situation. We all miss this kind of public programs. We all missed coming together. We missed our openings. We missed our events. We missed the social aspects of the art scene. And we missed the art also. But, as we heard yesterday on public television here in Holland by the government, we will slowly open up again. Next week we can already welcome the double amount of visitors than this week. So we have a good feeling about it, and we have the feeling that this summer things can happen again. It's a great pleasure to be the host of the Amsterdam Art Talk, so to say, today. And it's a talk about the local, about the locality, and about the international status quo. And being the director of an international museum, of the International Museum in Amsterdam, we have the feeling that we are based in a city in which the local and the international come together very well. And that we have the great obligation as a Stedelijk Museum to do something on both levels, to bring them together, to level up, to come to a situation in which the local and the international come together very much. We, as I said, are an international museum, but we are currently also working on a new program on Amsterdam art and a new program for a new kind of institution, and we will be able to communicate on this quite soon, most likely this summer already. And we, as the Amsterdam art scene, we're all working on multivocality. We're all working on inclusion. We're all working on a situation in which the number of voices to be heard is growing steadily. And this is, I think, the guarantee also for an international art scene. The multivocality is the basis for an international future. This is my only statement I wanted to make. It's only a greeting, it's only a word of welcome I'm addressing to you here. And it's a great pleasure to thank Nina Volkersma from Amsterdam Art, who organized a wonderful week here, and everybody is still able to come to Amsterdam for the rest of the week. There's a lot to do. I thank the speakers of today, Joost Bosland, Otobong Nakanga, Charles Landford, Adam Simchich, and I thank Gershwin Bonavacha, who will do another kind of input, a performative input. I thank Britta Slotak for organizing the public program here at Stedelijk. And I think everybody, well, everybody sounds like a lot. There's not so many people here, but because we're not allowed to have too many people, but I think the people who are present here, and I give the floor to Nina, and I wish all of you a very concentrated afternoon, a very discursive afternoon, and an afternoon with some results we can grow with. Nina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rijn, and thank you, Stedelijk Museum, for hosting and co-organizing this debate. As the brand new director of Amsterdam Art, I am delighted to moderate this conversation this afternoon about locality and the international status quo in relation to the Amsterdam contemporary art scene. It's an incredible honor, and I'm also very humbled to have such distinguished speakers with me this afternoon. Rijn already mentioned the speakers. I will probably introduce them when I have them at my table. But before I do so, I would like to tell you a little bit about Amsterdam Art. Amsterdam Art was founded 10 years ago with the aim of strengthening Amsterdam's position as a leading center for contemporary art, of celebrating the talent in this city, and of strengthening the coherence and solidarity of the field as a whole. To this end, the annual Amsterdam Art Weekend was established, a 4-day event in which the city is buzzing with exhibitions, performances, gallery tours, debates, studio visits. And this year, in view of the COVID-19 measures, the Art Weekend is extended to a full art week, which started last Thursday and which will continue until Sunday 27th. Although promoting Amsterdam as an international art hub is one of our ambitions, it is not an end in and of itself. We want to use our unique position as a spider in the web in the midst of the galleries, the institutions, the museums, the residencies, the non-profit spaces, to stimulate the discussions about the social, economic and geopolitical context of art and the changing profile and preferences of new art lovers. We do this in collaboration with all the participating art institutes. So we organize public programs and debates like this, in which we want to reflect on important themes and questions that shape the art world today, but always grounded in the Amsterdam context. And this brings me to the topic of today, locality and the international status. What is the position of Amsterdam in the international field? To what extent is nurturing the international still worth pursuing? And is it still valid post-corona? And how to develop a different kind of sensitivity to the local? Before we start, I would like to place a few disclaimers on the general concepts that we use in this discussion. Because of course the local or locality or the international or the global are no fixed entities or fixed positions. And there's no such thing as a uniform or a general Amsterdam art scene, nor is there one Amsterdam. The city is home to more than 170 different nationalities, which is one of the highest numbers in the world. Amsterdam has been a destination for generations of international artists through its many residency programs that we have in the city. Next to the renowned the Rijksacademie and the ateliers, there are numerous artist residency programs for artists from all over the world who stay here or work here for a longer or shorter period of time. So it is evident that the city is constantly moving, growing, changing, transforming, with new people coming and going and bringing the world to Amsterdam and taking pieces of the city with them to the world. So based on this, one could argue that Amsterdam's locality is international. But what does it mean to be international? If we talk about the international, we need to talk about the concept of the global and the ways in which globalization, initially as an economic force, but quickly also as a political and cultural force, has created a global art world in which artistic creations became more and more homogeneous, at least in the 1990s and 2000s. And additionally, the international today is not the international of 20 years ago. The World Wide Web and social media have made us hyper-connected and super international, without having to leave our armchair or, on the contrary, by using the cheap flights that became available to all. As a consequence, the Western Eurocentric perspective of the art world has been increasingly challenged, instead bringing into view an art world with multiple centers, each with its own history and canon. So what does this mean from a curatorial perspective, from an artistic perspective, and from a gallery point of view? The speakers of this afternoon will share their thoughts and insight about these topics and these discussions. We only have like 15 to 20 minutes for each session, so it will be really difficult, or not to say impossible, to unpack all the topics. It will be more like speed dating, so we try to get to the point as quickly as possible. So now, without any further ado, I would like to introduce my first guest, and that is Adam Simchich. Unfortunately, he was not able to travel to Amsterdam, so we will speak with him via a Zoom connection. I'm not sure if he's here, and in the meantime, I will grab my bottle of water. We are waiting for Adam. Maybe I can already start by introducing Adam. Adam Simchich is a curator and author based in Basel and Zurich. He was the artistic director of Documenta 14 and in Athens and in Kassel between 2013 and 2017. Adam Simchich also worked as a director of Kunsthalle Basel from 2003 to 2014. And in 2008, he co-curated with Elena Filipovic the 5th biennial of contemporary art in Berlin. And Adam participated in the Appels curatorial program in Amsterdam in 1995, 1996, the same year as I did. We worked together on the exhibition Crapshoot with the Appel participants Annie Fletcher, Clive Kellner, and Kay Pallister. So Adam, welcome and nice to see you again. It's been a long time. How are you? He's freezed. I thought he was really concentrated, but...
See me at all? Excuse me? Do you see me at all?
It's a long time ago. Yeah, so I would like to start the conversation by kind of looking back at Amsterdam in the mid-90s. You arrived in Amsterdam from Warsaw. So how did you experience Amsterdam at the time, and what was your impression of the local art scene here in Amsterdam?
Amsterdam is far more colorful and, say, diverse than the scene in Warsaw, since there weren't, that many international artists or art students or people passing by Warsaw at that time. So it was kind of limited to few visitors and mostly, ethnically Polish population. And we felt still a little isolated. So, of course, like any chance to get out of the country and travel somewhere, which at the time meant travel Western Europe, was welcome. And so, as I remember, this course at the Appel over several months, for me personally, it was just a great opportunity to experience a lot in the entire Europe. And
I'm sorry, Adam. I have to interrupt you because the connection is not very good. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but the images seems to stop all the time. Is there a possibility to make a new connection so we can actually hear?
Take this was over, and
I'm looking at the technical. The image should be off, yes. Maybe it's better, we love seeing your face, but maybe it's better if you turn off the image so we can actually hear, because the sound is not coming through. Right. No, I'm not sure either. What I would like to suggest, if the organization agrees with me, that we now continue with the conversation, the second conversation, and that we try to get back to Adam afterwards. So we kind of swap the program. Yes? Okay. Then I would love to invite Ottobong and Charles, and I will introduce you once you are here at the table.
plaatsen.
That's a weird high chair. Okay. Welcome. So I will kind of officially introduce you. I will start with Otto Bong. Otto Bong is an artist. I'm going to stand as well because this seat is a bit weird. So, Otto Bong is an artist who works in drawings, installations, photographs, sculptures, and performances, and examines the social and topographical relationship with our everyday environment. By exploring the notion of land as a place of non-belonging, Nkanga provides an alternative meaning to the social ideas of identity. Paradoxically, she brings to light the memories and historical impacts provoked by humans and nature. She lays out the inherent complexities of resources like soil and earth and their potential value in order to provoke narratives and stories connected to land. Her work is also part of the Stedelijk Museum collection, and her solo exhibition at Lumen Travo Gallery just opened during the Amsterdam Art Week, so make sure to go and visit. And we have Charles Landford, who recently joined the Stedelijk Museum as head of research and curatorial practice in October last year. He will draw on his background as an artist and researcher with a special focus on curatorial practice to reflect on presentations and the new direction of the Stedelijk, and guides the publication and research program of the museum. As a researcher and for his PhD dissertation at the Royal College of Art in London, he investigated strategies that ask whether art created by artists with an immigrant background can be recognized as an original part of Dutch visual culture. As an artist, Landford's oeuvre largely comprises installation, sculpture, and video. Using a broad range of artistic disciplines, he applies the result of his research to think about citizenship and belonging and how this is expressed in the visual arts in continental Europe. He advocates for local continental European concepts and language coming out of these spaces that have the potential to speak about the sensibilities specific to the area. So thank you and welcome. And as artists, you both deal with notions of place and how place relates to our ideas of social identity and belonging or non-belonging. How do you address or translate these notions in your work? First, I give the word to Otto Bong.
I was hoping that you would give the first word to Charles.
We can swap if
but
you...
But it's okay. I think I can go ahead with that. And I think, you know, I would start from a place of thinking of my childhood and always believing that that would be the place I would live and die in. And then you get to realize as you grow up that the world is bigger and that your history is totally connected to the histories of the world. When I remembered in school studying Yoruba, Brazilian architecture, and then you start understanding that interconnection with another place and how, for example, in Brazil, the notion of architecture and how that enters into a place like the Yoruba kingdom, how the Calabas enter also into Cuba, and how also plants and certain things enter into histories in America, Asia, and how that is so interconnected. But you learn that over time, and you learn that you belong to every single place because your history is totally interconnected. But we are also separated by that notion of territory, by politics, by certain kind of social and cultural interactions, and also by borders that have been put in place to make us understand that we do not belong to a place. Mm-hmm. And visa systems that make it impossible to even visit places that your history is connected to. And that history makes you understand yours, maybe even better. And so that notion of interconnectedness, belonging, is beyond a national state, beyond a continent, but connected to places that are extremely and intricately connected.
Very concise.
Thank you, Otto. Yeah. Well, it was funny that you said that that we have, because I think our practices connect strongly. I will follow your lead in explaining how it connects. I think that when I started my studies, I was looking at the idea of hybrid cultural identity, as I was trying to understand how then does my Surinamese background and my Dutch upbringing, how do they connect? And to make a long story short, I came to the final conclusion that I am physically African, ethnically South American, and culturally European. And we do not have a way yet to speak this subjectivity. And it is therefore that specifically within the continental European context, I think that we should find our own concepts and way of speaking about it, because the American race-based language is not necessarily the way for us to go, as we are trying to give word to what it is that our presence or my presence, let me speak for myself, entails. So yeah, thank you, Otto, for making the introduction, because it's the interconnectedness, how you are connected to all these different places and all these different continents through different stages of yourself, so to speak. Yeah.
And how does this relate to your position as an artist, or specifically to your work? Do you would you like your work to be kind of really connected to or embedded to a local art scene, or to be recognized internationally? How?
Well, there is the problem, of course, that the system does not allow you per se to enter the scene that you would like to. Mm-hmm. And if we look at the Netherlands specifically, if you are a black or brown artist, you can choose how to position yourself, and consequently how your position basically puts you in the market. If you are a black or brown artist up until, let's say, very recently, mm-hmm. and you made work that explicitly mentioned that, then you were an ethnic artist, so to speak. So you had the choice to either be an ethnic artist or try and avoid all the blackness that was in you, and then create art so you would be accepted as an artist. And then, of course, there's the international art market, which is very hard to get into, so to speak. But then what we have is the international black market as an art market, which again is another route to take. So if you, I think, as an artist, start to think about how to position yourself, it is very important to have all of that in mind, and also understand the structures that are in place to keep you in your place. And the question then becomes, as an artist, how do you not accept the place that has been given to you, but how do you create a new space for you where you belong, where your subjectivity actually can flourish? And that, I think, is, or was until recently, the big question, but the world is changing rapidly, and I do think that artists have the possibility now to go into spaces that weren't available before.
Well, thanks for that. I'm just going to take it from the point of like going into places that weren't there for you before. And I think like there are many artists that are also thinking about creating spaces that not necessarily have to deal with the international or deal with this other world, but there are many possibilities and many structures. And me coming from the African continent, living here in Europe, and I've lived here for a long time, you get to realize that there are also other kinds of ways of doing things and other kinds of ways of reflecting on how to make art and how to go beyond even art and enter into spheres of like the social, the economical, the geography of a place, the locality of a place. And so for me, that is kind of interesting to see how that goes beyond a specific locality and goes beyond the notion of thinking of international and who has the right to give who the place to sit at a table or not. And I think one reaches a point that one has to think beyond that and not necessarily sit at the table, but make your own new table.
I totally agree with you. People are not interested in the table anymore.
No.
So, up until recently, there was get me a seat at the table, and nobody's interested in the table anymore. So other tables are being created, and other spaces are being created. And I think this is specifically the pressure and also the challenge for museums and art institutes that are grounded in the West, to see how then to be part of these systems that are being created and these systems that emerge that do not depend on the old systems that were there. So as we are all trying to find new ways to create spaces, then institutes needs to see how they can get along, how can they get with the program, so to speak.
Yeah. So what are then, according to you, kind of the major, the changes? What has changed in the recent years?
Well, maybe I could say certain things have changed in the sense of accessibility to certain places. And I would talk about the border kind of constructions and also having access to certain lands or certain continents. And people have to find other ways of working. We have online structures that are in place where we have young artists and artists seeing that this can be a platform to be able to showcase their work, to be able to collaborate. And we've seen of recent years the non-fungible tokens and things like that, you know. And you're seeing that people are being creative with means that do not have to cross a certain kind of territory, but have to use digital platforms, other kinds of platforms to be able to render what they're doing visible. I see also a lot of collaboration and also people talking, saying, and there are other kinds of communities that are being formed that allow for new ways of working, new ways of presentation. And for me, I think that's also an interesting platform to look at, and that's what has changed also in a way. But and when we think of not being able to visit a museum because you can't get a visa, and you're from certain territories and you're from the southern regions, then what else can you do then to create ways in which you can still be visible and you can maybe still see certain things? So it's not only about what the artist wants or what the international but it's about the kinds of policies and laws and structures that have been put in place to allow for certain people not to have accessibilities. Yeah. And I think that is something that is changing also with the COVID times, that we'll see that accessibility and movement will not be as easy as, even though it was difficult before, it might be even more difficult.
Yeah. And what I would like to add to that, Ottobong, that what you see is that what we call so-called popular culture, it is in there where all these connections and all these spaces are being created, and the art scene as we know it is lagging behind in, how do you say it, being part of that, or being part of that creation. When we look at music, for instance, what happens in the music industry, in the museums we're trying to be diverse. Well, the music industry is not even talking about that. Yeah? If we talk about fashion isn't even talking about that. They're already doing it. Yeah, so
what are the conservative powers that keep the visual arts kind of restrained to these division?
It is. I think at the end of the day, it's a matter of power. It's a matter of who decides what is what, right? And I think within the so-called big art scene, we as art administrators, etc., have an interest in being able to, or keeping the mandate in what is art and what is not.
The status quo.
The status quo. Yeah. We have an interest in that, a big interest in that. So the question is, how can we change our interest in such a way that it is still a win-win situation for all parties involved, and we can still keep on doing what we're doing? Now that, I think, is the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
I just heard on the radio that it wasn't Guatemala, another country, I'm sorry, I don't want to be, in South America, they adopted Bitcoin as a new official currency in the country, right? Come on? El Salvador. Now, this is what I mean, where and then IMF is like, whoa, what's going on, you know? And the United States is also like, oh, what's going on? Because what's happening through that is that the official system that is in place to keep countries like Guatemala in check doesn't apply anymore if they go this route. And this is what you see also in the cultural field, that people do not accept anymore the dollar. They try and go with something else, in this case the internet or other spaces to create, just to undermine the power that is in place, that they do not want to, or that people do not want to adhere to anymore.
Well, I will add to that. I think that once a lot of institutions start seeing that certain artists have an economical power, in the sense that their works are being sold and that they have a certain visibility, either having followers or whatever it is, or having their works going in auction, or having a museum buying their works, or we start also seeing that certain museums that were actually the guardians of, or like the gatekeepers, kind of start changing and say, oh wow, this is happening, we're seeing it, and it's going underneath our nose. And we have to hurry up. So you have this kind of thing like, we have to hurry up now and include this different kinds of works, and because it's kind of finding other ways of existence, and that existence then becomes like a norm, and that norm then becomes like, how come we're not part of it? So I think it's kind of ruled by those kinds of policies, by economy, and also by works that open up other worlds of understanding, in which the collection of a museum or of an institution sees that it's very important to have it in there, but it hasn't yet understood how to even work with it. But the artist, let's come back to the artist. The artist continues to make the work, with or without the institution. The artist continues to build, to observe, to make us see a different world, to make us understand, to make us feel. And without even a museum or a structure, the artist will keep on making. And that, I think, is very important for humanity itself, and for feeling and understanding what we are in this world.
Yeah. I think this is a wonderful kind of last remark for this round of conversations that we're having. I am not sure if we can go to... We cannot go to Adam Simchich. Okay, this makes me really sad. Okay, so we go to, I think, the intermezzo, which is kind of really lifting my heart again. It's a beautiful spoken word performance by Gershwin Bonavacha. I will also kind of properly introduce you. Gershwin Bonavacha is a Dutch poet, writer, and spoken word artist. He was appointed City Poet of Amsterdam last year, in addition to being a full-time writer. In 2017, he published his debut collection, Ik heb een fiets gekocht, which is followed by his new collection of poems entitled Toen ik klein was, was ik niet bang. With his work, he strives to connect people from different backgrounds and to bring together classical poetry and all of its branches. As the assigned city poet of Amsterdam, he addresses topics such as the city, education, and the past with a playful and philosophical approach. So I give the word to you.
Yes, thank you. The poem is going to be in Dutch, and the translation will be on the screen. Kunst is het belangrijkste fundament. De stad is een landschap, gebloemschikt naar het ritme van de mensen en de kunsten. Creativiteit, inspiratie en verbinding zijn de ankers. Er is eigenlijk maar één opdracht. Onderdeel zijn van een culturele beweging. Juist in begrenzing, alle immateriële waarden in je voelen stijgen. Amsterdam moet je bewaren, dus in opstand komen. Of je blijft gebroken. Vraag het aan de boys uit Holendrecht. Ze zullen zeggen, we zijn een expositie. Een permanente tentoonstelling gewijd aan een kunstenaar. Niet gewijd aan een strijd waarin alleen de sterkste overwinnen. Maar waar ook de kleine instellingen een bijdrage leveren aan het geheel. Als instrumenten in een opera of woorden in een gedicht. Potentie bestaat niet doordat het wordt herkend. Talent is geen flatscreen, maar een kijkdoos. We zijn allemaal verantwoordelijk, want in onze stad is kunst een religie. Waar je hem vast kan houden als je bent blijven hangen of niet meer omhoog durft. Amsterdam is een canvas, overal nog sporen van een oude compositie, wel voldoende ruimte. Kleuren moet je. Dat je kan zeggen, de stad is ook van mij. De vaste collectie bestaat uit gestoorde Noorderlingen, het Bosselommerplein en de Indische buurt. We zijn wit, zwart, dragen paarse mascara. Het is hier duur, maar we zitten op de voorste rij. De stad is niet van steen, maar wordt gedragen door de mensen, door een context, door een uitwisseling, een culturele omgeving, linksboven, maar vooral ook alle randen. We zijn een oneindige expositie. Het heeft geen zin om af te maken wat nooit af te krijgen is. We zijn begonnen met de bouw van een grote tempel, maar zullen er nooit in slagen hem te voltooien. Er zijn vraagstukken zat, maar elk steegje kent een antwoord. Elk metrostation een ander perspectief. Soms zijn de veranderingen kenbaar. Elders is het nog een lange weg. We bestaan in relatie tot onze sociale positie. Kunst heeft het vermogen om de mentale en fysieke grenzen van onze werkelijkheid op te rekken. Kunst is geen idee. Geen tijdelijke plaatsing, maar een wereld waarin je kan wonen, de lokale en internationale contexten stromen als een kruisbestuiving door de leidingen van ons lijf. Vaak zien we dingen apart, levend in een eigen tijd. Maar laten we het getik van ons horloge omruilen voor het geklop van ons hart. Amsterdam is art. Hier mag je altijd thuiskomen. Onderweg zijn, als eindbestemming of daartussen. Hier mag je thuiskomen als je zorg draagt voor de mensen en de kunsten.
Thank you so much, Bonavacha. So we continue to our third conversation. So I invite Joost Bosland to join me. Welcome. You will also get like the proper introduction. Joost Bosland is one of 13 owners of Stevenson, a gallery with spaces in Cape Town and Johannesburg and an office in Amsterdam. He has been with the gallery since a 3-month internship in 2005. He holds a BA from Duke, an MA from Wits, and is currently pursuing a PhD on the writings of the South African art theorist Colin Richards. Among the artists that Bosland works closely with at the gallery are Nicolas Lobo, Moshekwa Langa, Zanela Moholi, Robin Rode, and Viviane Sasse. In the absence of local institutions dedicated to contemporary art from 2005 to 2015, the gallery was instrumental in bringing international artists to South Africa, often for the first time, including El Anatsui, Rineke Dijkstra, Olafur Eliasson, Glenn Lyon, Walid Raad. So, well, Joost, you are one of 13 directors of the Stevenson Gallery. So you recently opened an office in Amsterdam. Can you briefly share with us how this came about?
Wow, what an intimidating introduction. It came about like all of the best things come about through the initiative of an artist. Mm-hmm. We've represented Viviane Sassen for, I'm trying to calculate, probably about 10 plus years. So I was coming to Amsterdam to see her, among other people, for years, getting to know the city a little bit. I left Holland when I was 16. And at one point, I got a phone call from her studio manager saying, Joost, the basement is emptying up. You need to rent the basement or the ground floor of the studio building. Mm-hmm. Sort of laughed and said, we can't afford that. We were a South African gallery. We had no sort of vision of empire building or expanding beyond Cape Town and Johannesburg. But Vivian kept insisting. Every time I phoned her about an exhibition, she asked if he thought about that space. Every time we edited a book, she asked, how about this space? And she sort of kept pushing and kept pushing. And what you do as a gallerist, you eventually give in, right? Mm-hmm. That's how these things go. And I sort of told my 12 partners I'd like to rent a space in Amsterdam. They all thought I was crazy. And then we did a little bit of math, and that's where it got really interesting. We did sort of a budget for the first 2-3 years and realized that you could have a space in Amsterdam for a full year for the amount of money we would normally spend for 1 week at Frieze London or 1 week at Art Basel. And then sort of the light bulb went off, because how can you get to know a city differently, not through an art fair, not in a convention center, but really slowly. Mm-hmm. So we did it. It was initially an office, and then last year when all art fairs stopped, we decided to actually make it a fully fledged gallery. Mm-hmm. From September we've had regular opening hours, and we're open right now as I speak.
And do you also have a specific interest in the Amsterdam art scene? And what is your impression of the local art scene here? Is there anything kind of specific or unique to the
I think what makes the Amsterdam art scene unique or different to many of the other, specifically European capitals, is that it's very much artist-driven. It's very much driven by the academies. It doesn't have a big art fair. It doesn't have a gallery scene that compares to Brussels or London or Paris or Berlin. But that makes it really wonderful. The market sort of takes a bit of a backseat to other processes, and that's been really wonderful to discover. I'm still quite new. I've been here for maybe 9 months, so most people around here know the city much better than I do.
Okay, but you do know some of your fellow gallerists and curators. Do you see, what is your idea of the landscape of the galleries in Amsterdam?
The galleries are changing quite rapidly, it feels like. I think for quite a long time there was sort of a consensus. There was a very close alignment between what the galleries were programming and what is happening at some of the academies. And I think there's a sense now that there's space for change. There's a lot of new initiatives. But I'm also still learning and still finding out what actually is going on.
What interests you most when you say I'm still learning and looking? So where are you looking specifically?
I'm literally looking everywhere. I had a rule for the first couple of months that I said yes to every single email that I got. I had coffee with almost everyone. Quite selfishly, besides doing YouTube yoga, also started a podcast like everyone else during the pandemic, which was an excuse to speak to yet more people. We interviewed you not so long ago. And I've just been looking and learning and listening and realizing that we're very much the new kid on the block.
Yeah. You often mention that the art market, just like the Amsterdam art scene, does not exist, and that we also need to think in multiple art markets, each operating on a different level and in different local systems. Does this mean that, in your view, the global art market does not exist either? And could you elaborate on this?
And of course, there is something called the global art market because people write reports about it and we talk about it. But if you compare it to wine, which is something I like doing, the same person who is buying a bottle of 1961 Bordeaux at an auction in Hong Kong is not the person buying skin contact wine from Georgia for 15 euros in a shop in Amsterdam. And not even talking about supermarket wine. So the same is true for art. The people buying at different levels. It's not even that there's different local markets, that's true, but even within the local market, there's amazing collectors right here in Amsterdam who largely collect international art, who largely buy maybe at Art Basel or when they go on trips to New York. And then there are people who are really, really dedicated and visit the Hazenstraat once a month and see all the exhibitions and buy things locally. And all those things exist in parallel. And then there's something like Avant Arte, which is probably the biggest success story in the Amsterdam art market. And I'm betting half of you haven't heard of them. They sell online editions. They have 2 million followers on Instagram, which is
Is it crazy?
a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
And they also know people in the global art world, and they have a totally different audience again. So there really isn't one art market, not even one local market.
And what if you would compare it to, because you worked for the gallery in Cape Town?
Yeah.
Can you kind of sketch a picture of how the scene in Cape Town is?
I'm going to try and not upset some people here. You guys have it so good, or we have it so good. There's so much money for art in Amsterdam. And I know there were really severe cuts 10 years ago, and we do want to convince, if we ever get a new government, we want to convince them to reinstate some of those funds. But compared to Cape Town, in Cape Town there is basically no government support. So all the international art that's being brought to South Africa, up until very recently, was in the commercial galleries. Some new institutions have kind of caught up. Otterboom knows very much about this because she's working with Said Smoka very closely. There's the Norval Foundation, there's others. So I think we look, from the outside, we look in on Amsterdam and with a little bit of envy maybe, or jealousy, just to see how much depth there really is, how many different layers there are to the scene, and how much money still there is.
My kind of very young experience as the director of Amsterdam Art, and the kind of voices or sounds that I hear from the galleries here are not as positive and optimistic as you hear. I also hear a lot of comparisons, for instance, with Belgium, that there are no kind of big collectors, or there's not a lot of money here in Amsterdam. So, yeah.
Again, I think it looks a little bit different looking in from the outside, because I very much see the collectors living in Belgium. And it's true that the collecting tradition in Belgium is much richer than here. They're also our audience. It's 2 hours by car to Antwerp, to Brussels. Paris is our audience. London is our audience. People love coming to Amsterdam for a weekend, especially when it's Amsterdam Art Week. So, I think it's, I don't know, I think it's maybe a bit easy to say, oh, local collectors are not spending enough money. Just, open and be.
And would you say the focus of your program with the Stevenson Gallery is because you came from South Africa, you also represent a lot of artists from the African continent, and specifically from South Africa, that kind of makes also the identity of your gallery here within the Amsterdam art scene?
By default, that was true when we opened up, but we couldn't help ourselves, and we started looking around a little bit here. We're curious people. I got the same question about 6 months ago, and I said yes. And now I've noticed that I got to know a painter here in Amsterdam that I'm very interested in, and we're showing one of her paintings at the gallery at the moment. I also stumbled upon the most amazing story of Oei Cheng Sit, who was one of the early sort of post-colonial Dutch artists. He had a pharmacy on the Prinsengracht, friends with Escher, and was doing all kinds of Fluxus-type experimental things. So I'm very interested in that story. So I think slowly but surely our presence here will start to affect our program. It's not like we ever set out to be an African gallery. We're a contemporary gallery that was founded in Cape Town, so that was our immediate context. Yeah. And our immediate context includes you and you and you.
Yeah. Are you also, because there are a lot of residency programs in the city, as I mentioned in my introduction, are you in touch with these residency programs, or with artists coming from the South Africa or African continent to here?
I mean, the 3 artists we represent who live here are Vivian Sasson, who we spoke about, Moshekwa Langa, who came here for the Rijksacademy in the late 90s and still lives here, and Neo Matloga, who came here for the ateliers and decided to stay. So we're incredibly aware. There's also Peter Clark, a black South African artist who was at the Rijks. I think in the 60s. So there's this long history. There's the Tammy Niele Foundation that has hosted a range of artists we've worked with. And especially now, selfishly, I enjoy the idea of getting artists that I know to Amsterdam. So I'm definitely looking at what the residency programs can do.
Yeah. And I know I just heard that the conversation with Adam Simchich is not going. So actually, I would like to improvise now a little bit, and I would like to invite Otto Bong and Charles to join me at the table so we can have a little bit more time of a joint conversation.
Curveball,
Very
guys.
reluctant.
Curveball.
Yes. Okay. Yes, you can. Okay.
I'll stand.
You'll stand?
Ja.
Right. Wil je zitten?
Nee, ik ga, dat is prima.
Okay, maybe we should go back. I have all these papers here in front of me. Maybe we should go back to kind of the initial questions of locality and the international. And maybe, well, maybe it's nice, first of all, to have you respond to each other. Well, you already responded to each other, but what do you think of how the gallery?
Of Joost.
Yes.
He seems like a very nice young man. No, I'm not. I know the Stevenson Gallery by name, and because some artists that I really enjoy working with and looking at their work, and know personally that they're with your gallery. So this is how I know them. But I'm not fully invested in, how do you say it, their practice, so I can't say anything about it that would be worthwhile.
Because which is one of the missions of Amsterdam Art, to really kind of strengthen also the coherence between the different parts of the art world, and there's always this kind of tension between the museum and the gallery world, the commercial world. Is this something that you, now working within the museum, also experience, and is this something that you experienced?
Yes.
All right. I'll be honest, I've experienced it with some institutions. I think it's a bit of an outdated idea about what galleries do and how galleries function, especially in the light of the discussion I think that you guys were having earlier. Many of the artists who were being excluded for a range of reasons from the institutions were showing in galleries all that time. So I think in many ways galleries were actually ahead of the curve on some of these discussions. Not all galleries and not all institutions, but I think on the whole, because galleries can do things much more easily and freely. We don't have the same levels of bureaucracy to navigate. So I think one of the quickest ways to put on a show if you don't have access is to open a gallery, because you can sell the work and that funds what you're doing, and you don't need to wait for government subsidies. So I'm a firm believer in the model. But that goes without saying.
Yeah. I would like to go back to something that you said about kind of actually we need a new language to talk about kind of belonging and the international and the local. Could you expand a little bit on this, and where can we find this language? How can we?
I'm not sure we can find it direct. It's just a matter of translation. Not every word. I mean, we are here in the Netherlands, and so English is our second language, which most of us do understand, but it's not our mother tongue, so to speak. So every word that we use, every term that we use needs a translation from the specific context in which that word got its meaning to our context. And these contexts, as they do not match socially and also culturally, there's always a little bit of slippage. There is a slippage, there's a discrepancy in what it actually means or what the word actually does. And it is therefore that even though this conversation is in English, I would have preferred to have When we talk about difficult conversation, I prefer to have them in Dutch, because when we have them in Dutch, we see that it becomes extremely painful because we do not have words to speak what we need to speak about. And it is right there and then that new words or new meanings are created together. So I would advocate for the difficult conversations that we are having here, let's try having them in Dutch first, and then see what happens, right? See what happens. And because, for instance, you talked about my thesis. I used the word culturally native. Yeah? I cannot translate culturally native to Dutch, because then it becomes something extremely, what is native again in Dutch? God, my head. Huh? Inheems, yeah. And when you say inheems in Dutch, it doesn't mean the same thing as native in English, even though on paper it means the same thing, but the feeling is different, the social construct of the word is different. So if I say cultureel inheems, wow, that's quite heavy, while if I say culturally native, it means something else. So then I translated it to cultuur eigen. Nice. Yeah, because cultuur eigen as an idea is something that matches our sensibility rather than the word native or the word inheems. So it is here that I think where we can find the language when we try and say something in Dutch. And that's why we need poets, that's why we need writers, to give us new language so that we can speak our own sensibilities and our own issues in our own language, and thus be able to find a construct that works for us. So this is where I would say it lies. Yeah.
Would you like to respond, Otto, about the question about the new language?
Yeah. Well, language is quite a complicated thing because, coming from a place like Nigeria or even living in Belgium, between the Dutch language and the Flemish language, you already have words that, that are totally different. A beenhouwer to a slagerij, which is two different things. So the bone, and a houwer, the been, So you're looking at words that are coming from different kinds of ways of seeing the society. And so for me, it's interesting that I lived in Amsterdam and then I live in Antwerp, and then certain words I'm like, how do they say that? How come that is that? And you understand that even by a slight shift of geography and a slight shift of history, you start seeing that language actually shifts. In the Flemish language, you would have French words, people would say merci because you have the French very close by. And so you start understanding by that slight move that actually language is fluid and that it needs to shift and it needs to change, and that certain histories from a certain time, certain words have to change. Like you could think of autochtone, and the words that are being used to define someone coming from another place, and you start realizing that are these the kinds of words when someone has been part of your history for years, and do you have to make words that connect to a certain kind of division instead of actually including that person within the histories and within the geography of that place. So I feel like the new kinds of words that could be thought through writers, thinkers, have to really think of that notion of not division, but something that is actually binding together and connecting the histories that are in place. So I totally, understand that by just moving through space, or even when I go to Cape Town or in South Africa, that there's certain words that are being used that were from the 18th century. So you start understanding even the Dutch landscape by the language that was used in a certain place. And for me, that shows that fluidity and that kind of, and it's in constant development anyway, yeah.
If you don't mind, I would like to add something about cultural specificity.
Yes.
And this example makes it clear for everybody. In English, you say, let's take a picture. In Dutch, you say, let's make a picture, een foto maken. There's a difference between taking and making. That's a cultural difference already in the same act. And it is there where why it is important that it has to be culturally specific. Yeah.
I liked what you said, Charles, sorry. And I think already the four of us having this conversation in English, whereas we could very well be having this conversation in Dutch.
Makkelijk.
Maybe not.
I'm not
Mr. Nick.
Well, actually, this is where I would love for Gershwin to, because it was wonderful for us Dutch people to hear Dutch, and it was so specific. Do you also write in English, or do you mix the languages? Can you, yeah?
No, my English is like very terrible. So I think it's a good thing.
If you prefer, you can speak in Dutch, and we.
Ja, graag.
Yeah, we translate. Yes.
Yeah. Nee, ik word wel eens gevraagd om iets in het Engels te schrijven of in Amsterdam in een internationale context wat te schrijven en voor te dragen. Alleen als schrijver vind ik zelf mijn Engels niet op hetzelfde niveau als wat mijn Nederlands zeg maar kan zijn. Dus dat vind ik heel erg lastig. Maar die taal en die verschillende betekenissen die dat heeft, dat heb ik heel erg ervaren als vertaler. Ik ben bijvoorbeeld, of in ieder geval, ik ben er al mee klaar. Ik heb het kinderboek van Amanda Gorman heb ik vertaald de afgelopen 2 maanden. En dat is een kinderboek, heel toegankelijk taalgebruik in het Engels. Maar dan merk je hoe lastig het is om bepaalde metaforen vast te kunnen houden en dat te kunnen vertalen in het Nederlands. En ik kwam net vanuit Arkham. Vandaag is de dag van de architectuur. En toen hadden ze een kalender gemaakt over gebouwen en wat ze betekenen, et cetera. En toen hadden ze het over de feministische groei de afgelopen jaren. En er waren heel veel woorden die in het Engels zijn overgenomen, waarvan we in Nederlands eigenlijk niet echt een betekenis hebben. Waardoor het toch wel een bepaalde afstand creëert. En waardoor je altijd vanuit voorbeelden moet praten. En niet bepaalde woorden hebt om dat te kunnen vasthouden. Dus ik denk dat dat een heel erg interessant fenomeen is. Hè, van hoe kan je iets toegankelijk maken. Want soms zorgt taal ervoor dat het een bepaalde afstand creëert. Soms zorgt het ervoor dat wat is het juiste woord daarvoor? Dat je het niet goed je eigen kan maken. En ik denk inderdaad wat je zei, dat vaak de opdracht van schrijvers kan zijn, van dichters kan zijn, van kunstenaars, om dingen die wij nog geen houvast kunnen geven, om die dan een benaming te geven.
You understand Dutch? You can...
There's some words that I don't get precisely because they're, but in general the kind of overall of the verhaal.
Yes,
kan ik begrijpen.
Because I'm not sure if I can completely translate what you're saying, but the point, of course, is also that just speaking your own language, which makes it really more specific or more local, also means that you are not inclusive for people who don't speak the language. So that's, the international can also be a way of really including more people. So there is the tension.
Yeah, but that is also, I find that also to be a problem with the Dutch art scene in general. The how do you say it? Hoe zeg je dat in het Engels? Deze drang naar internationalisering. Yeah? While there is so much international here, right? The city itself is so international. And we're always going outside to be international, while the international is like you just walk out of the museum and there it is. So I find that a bit of an issue where I think, like, how can we recognize the international that is here? Because if we, as a gallerist, possibly, maybe not as a museum, but as a gallerist, I don't know how it works. But, there's a lot going on here. And dat betekent dus ook dat we in het Nederlands zouden kunnen spreken. For the English speakers at home means we could also speak in Dutch. Yeah.
Not all the international people living and working here speak Dutch.
But they can learn. We learned English. No, but I feel there's a tension there. And I know we're a nation of traders, right? That's what we do, we trade. So when I was in school, we had to learn English, German, French, and Spanish, right? because otherwise you couldn't trade. So it's our volksart, our what's the word in English? Our nature to speak several languages. Yes.
Yeah. I see that we're over time now, so I think we should wrap up the discussion. Well, thank you so much, speakers. And actually, I would like to end by quoting and translating into English one of the stroke paragraphs from your beautiful poem, kind of going back to the topic of today. The local and international context flow and are cross-pollinations through the pipelines of our bodies. I think that is actually summing up what also your artistic practices are about and what we all feel. So you can come home here if you care for the people and the arts. Thank you. Thank you, Ottobong. Thank you, Gershwin. Thank you, Charles and Joost. I would also like to thank Britte and Christel Vesters for helping me prepare this. Have a wonderful afternoon. I hope to see you during Amsterdam Art Week. We still continue the program until Sunday the 27th, so enjoy and hope to see you. Bye.
Thank you so much.